Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Sun City in Arizona. Hope you're all having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast, day 1162. Yes, we've been going for a little while. We are today going to be talking about because it's Family History Month. We're going to be talking about some different things about researching your family tree, different records you can find, and things like that, and giving you some tips and tricks along the way over the rest of October. We may change it up a little on some nights and do something completely different. Well, I can tell you right now that on Friday, October 7th, save the time at 5 p.m. Pacific, because we have a very special guest coming on, and we will not be talking family history on that one. I can tell you that. So we are going to throw in guests every now and again, just to throw a little spatter in the works type of thing. So today we are going to talk about vital records. What are they? What information can you glean off them? And why would you even want to look at them? So what are vital records? Vital records are birth and baptism records, birth certificates, baptism records, marriage certificates, and death certificates. Just the basic, very basic certifications and things. And what information can you get off them? Oh, it depends. And the reason I say it depends is because it depends. Excuse me. It depends on what time period you're looking in, what country, county, parish, town, city, state, province, territory. I'm trying to think of other words that describe an area you are looking at. And different countries, different regions, different parishes and stuff started recording birth, deaths, and marriages at different times and having requirements of, yes, you are to record. Because there was a time where it wasn't really officially recorded anywhere. It may have been written in a family Bible. It may have been written on a piece of paper somewhere. But there was a time when where it wasn't required to record births, deaths, or marriages. And in some places, when they didn't do the births, they did have the parish records, which showed the baptism of the child in there. And sometimes some of those baptism records have the date that the baby was born, some do not. So like I said, it depends. But there's a really, really cool website. If you go to Family Tree, if you go to familysearch.org, they have under the search feature a thing called Family Search Research Wiki. This thing is like a gold mine of information. Like, you can go in there, and I'm going to figure out how to share a screen on this Monday. You can go in there and you can click on the area that you're interested in looking for the records. And what it does is that, actually, let's see if I can't do that here, but we're going to click on this anyway so I can at least talk you through it. So you can go on here and you can find all the rules and regulations. You find a whole bunch of information about the country, the history of the country. You find out what record types that they keep, what record types are available, how to do research within that country, state, parish, town, city, county, region, and they tell you at what level the records are kept. Are they kept at a national level? Are they kept at a state level, a territory level, a province level? Are they kept in a parish? Who is responsible for keeping track of the records? And it may be based upon a date period as well, a time period for different records in different places. It'll give you background. It'll give you some history on the country. It'll give you some information on the culture of the country as well. It'll give you local research resources. It'll tell you the different types, how to begin researching in that area. Is anything about what is available online in that area and what is not? And because when you're looking at different records and stuff, especially if you're looking overseas, you may have to hire a genealogist in that area to go and research the records for you, because the records may not be online. They could be on microfiche or microfilm, have not been digitized, and they've got to go and search the indexes to find where those records are. and then pull those records for you. And if the copyright allows, yes, stuff is copyrighted, like birth certificates and all that sort of stuff is copyrighted. And some records they cannot publish for public thing. You actually have to go and stand there and look at the information in the book, and you're not even allowed to take pictures of it because of the copyrights. So there is some records that are like that, and this Research Wiki gives you all that information, which is really, really cool. But some of the basic information? We'll also talk about some of the other information you can find on there. But oh, flash! What was that flash? Some thought just flashed into my head and wiped my brain. Okay, we're talking vital records. Get back on track here, Helen. Some countries too will also tell you in the records that if the person, like for example, when I go and research the New Zealand birth, death, and marriage records, they are very specific on what records they will show you. And this is just looking at the index. This isn't even looking at anything else. It's just looking at the index. And I'm trying to find, there it is. So in New Zealand, for example, only because I've researched this so many times, you can search for births that occurred at least 100 years ago, stillbirths, if registered for stillbirths, at least 50 years ago, marriages that occurred 80 years ago, and deaths that occurred at least 50 years ago, or the deceased date of birth was at least 80 years ago. Those are the records that you can search. Anything with less than that, with between now and those dates, there are certain requirements that you have to meet in order to be able to search. You cannot search them online. Those are ones that you then have to call them up and say, this is, because they call them non-historical records. So there's the historical records, and if you're doing the non-historical records, then you have a whole nother way that you have to go about researching them and to why. And some places, even here in the States and England and that sort of stuff, have something similar in place on that as to what records they will allow people to view. And if you want copies of records, you have, in some cases, if it's sooner than the time span that they have for the records to be allowed to be seen, then you have to prove why you are doing it and that sort of thing. And each state is different. Each state is different. That's one thing I have found here in the States. You have the federal level, then you have the state level, then you have the county level, and I'm just sort of like, this is so confusing. In New Zealand, boom, that's it, done. New Zealand Police Force covers the whole country, done. I tell you, the law enforcement over here, it confuses me, because you go to some places and you're under federal police, you go to other places you're under U.S. Marshals, you go somewhere else it's under the sheriff's thing, you go somewhere else it's under the county police, under the town police, under the city police. I did a tour of DC one time. The tour guide was taking us around and he was explaining all of this different boundaries for law enforcement. He's like, this road we're driving on right now is actually policed by the federal police. And I just raised my hand and said, excuse me. He goes, yeah. I says, so if you see a crime committed, or you want to attract an attention of a police officer, and you see a car driving by, how am I supposed to know if I'm flagging down the right person? Like if I need to flag down a police officer and I see a police car driving by and I flag him down, can he stop if he is a city police and we're on a federal road? And he goes, oh yeah, they'll still stop, but they will call in whoever needs to come in to deal with whatever it is. I'm just like, that's a very roundabout way of doing things, but whatever. Anyway, back on track. So so the Research Wiki will tell you what records are available online, what ones are not available online. They may even have in there that if you are going to this particular state, in order to get these records, you have to provide this proof. A lot of the times when they have those restrictions on of 80 years, 100 years, 50 years, they have those restrictions in place. And if you are going in through that time, only immediate family or direct descendants of that person's past direct descendants can look at those records, but you have to prove it. You can't just go and go, I want to see this record. I want to see if he's related. Yeah, no. You have to prove the family connection in some cases. Every place is very different. So have a look at the research wiki. If you're having to go into a place, call them ahead of time and find out, or go to their website and find out what are the requirements to get something that is under that, within that time period. If the person is still alive, a lot of times they won't give out that information. It has to be the actual person whose birth record it is or marriage record it is that has to show up to get it, to get a copy of it. So there's those sorts of things that you have to be aware of. But some of the basic information that you will find on birth certificates, again, the basic information on a birth certificate would be the name of the child. First name, middle name if there's a middle name, and a last name. And in some cases, this is interesting because I have, over the years when I've researched different countries, they all have different rules, and some of them have the same rule. You just weren't aware of it when you found, and you discovered it in a different country. So you go back to see if countries you've been researching have the same rules. And in one country I was researching, if the mother was unmarried when she had the child, the birth certificate did not list the father. They could only put the father on the birth certificate or the birth registration if the couple were married. So there was one family I was researching, and I found the birth certificate, the birth registrations and all of that. And the father was not named because the couple were not married. But the father is the one who registered the birth. And they put their, and they have the, what is your name? What is your name? How, who was the witness of the birth? The name of the witness of the birth is the person who registers it. And how is it that you came to, how is it that you're why are you recording this? And they said, I was present at the birth. But yeah, so there's also, all sorts of things can come out during this time. Like if you did not know that, say, grandparents were not married at the time when a child was born, and this is a country that adopts this type of information, that if the mother is unmarried, they do not put the father on there. They only put them on there if they're married. So if you're in a country where you're looking at birth records and that is their rule, you can find out some interesting things that you may not be ready to hear about. But typically on a birth certificate, you will find the name of the child, first name, middle name, last name. You will also find the name of the mother, and usually it is her maiden name, which is the name before they got married. Then you'll find the father's name. Sometimes you'll find the occupation of both parents. Sometimes you may not. Sometimes on there you may find the country that the parents were born in. Sometimes you may not. You may find out where they were born. There may be the time listed there. There may be the weight listed on that. The birth records in different countries may have extra information on there. May just be the basics, but the basics are the name of the child, when they were born, where they were born. It may be a doctor's signature that is on there. The doctor who did the delivery may be the signature on there. But finding those records, you can also go back and find hospital medical records as well later on, that can help, give you a little more information, if the medical records are available. They may have restrictions on those too. For baptisms, which have been recorded longer than births have been recorded, usually done at a parish or a church level, because it's their record of what happened. And you can go into, and some parishes, there's been a couple, where have I seen those, where it's all in the same volume, and it's all in chronological order of what happened in that day in that church. And it could be things like, well, we christened / baptized this baby, this couple got married, we had this funeral, and other parishes have got them in separate logs. So you can either get a log that's got all the information in there, and some of it will actually write it out in longhand. Like, it's very interesting. I was doing some research on a family that came from Mexico. I don't speak Spanish, so Google Translate came to the rescue. I know I suspect it's not as accurate as it could be, but it gave me the key words that I could look for, like the father, the mother, the name of the child, when they were born, if they were male or female, who were the witnesses. They actually had witnesses for the baptisms, in some places in Mexico. They had the witnesses' names listed. So that gave you other information about the family that you could then go and research. Oh, who are these people? Are they friends? Are they relatives? Who are they? But they wrote like a whole paragraph, and some of them it's a whole page about this baptism or about the wedding or about the death. They'll have like it's not, and some of them it's just an entry. It's a couple of lines and that's it. Others it's paragraphs or pages. Others are a few more lines, not quite a paragraph. My third great grandfather, it's on a pre-printed form in the parish records there, and it's all in date order. It's all in the order that it happened because it was filled out at the time of the christening or the christening/baptism, depending on what religion you are as to what it is, what that thing is called. And on the baptismal records for my third great grandfather, it had his name, it had his date of birth. Now, not all baptism records will have date of birth, just to give you a heads up. So it had his full name that he was being christened with, and that can be different to the birth certificate because the christening and / baptism does not usually happen at the same time as the birth. It's usually a few days, weeks, years later. Yes, in this case, my third great grandfather was baptized on his 6th birthday. He was baptized he was born in 1840 on the 5th of November. No, hang on. He was born in November of 1849, and he wasn't baptized until his 6th birthday in 1855, on his birthday. And it had his full, and I haven't found his. Yes, I do have his birth certificate. I do have a copy of his birth certificate. Sometimes the names can change. Sometimes the name on the birth certificate will be different to the name that they're actually christened with, which can make things confusing when you're researching people who have very similar names or very common names. And then it had the date he was born. It had his mother's name and if she had an occupation, what her occupation was, and where she lived. Then it had the father's name and his occupation and where he lived. Now, this is the one where I'm trying to figure out what happened to my 4th great grandfather because it has my 4th great grandmother there, and she's living at a different address, and underneath it's got that the father, and it's got his name out there in full, and his occupation was residing at, and it had it there. So it had a past tense, which sort of said to me, okay, he's either not in the picture anymore or he died, and that was his last known address. But I thought, if he died, why didn't they just put that he was deceased? Who knows? So sometime, between 1851, because she is listed on the 1851 census that she was married to a jeweler, and then by 1855, he wasn't in the picture anymore for whatever reason. So it can have the father's occupation. Sometimes it may not even mention, on baptism records, may not even mention the mother's name. There may be witnesses, there may not. But the cool part about witnesses is that you can then use those names to figure out how are they related to the family. Are they related to the family? Are they not related to the family? Who was the person who performed the baptism / christening? Because maybe there's other records that you can find out more about this person to give you an overall picture. Excuse me. So, and then directly underneath my third great grandfather's record, there was another child there who was 2 or 3, who had the same mother. My third great grandmother was the same person. They had the same address as my third great grandfather, but the father was different. And that's when I started doing the digging and found out that somewhere between 1851 and 1853, something happened, and this is what I'm trying to find out. Something happened in there that she ended up getting married to the next door neighbor who was the bookbinder, because my third great grandfather ended up being a bookbinder. And I was sort of like, where did that come from? Because his father was a jeweler, and his father was a jeweler, and his grandfather was a jeweler. My 4th great grandfather and my 5th great grandfather were both jewelers. That's as far back as I know, based on what is on certificates that we've found so far. So all of a sudden he becomes a bookbinder. Well, it's because he was basically raised by a bookbinder who was the guy next door that his mother married for whatever reason. We don't know what happened to my 4th great grandfather. That's the quest. That's the mystery. So then you can move on to marriage certificates, marriage registration / certificates. Registrations is where they register the marriage. Registrations is where they register everything like births, deaths, marriages, and then they can issue certificates based on the information that's in there. And how much information they put on the certificate is based on how much information they have in the register. Then you have marriage certificates. Now, in some cases, there are marriage bans, BANNS, which is where they had to announce for a certain number of weeks prior to the wedding that this couple was intending to get married on this particular date. And those were usually read out in the church and recorded that they were read and who was getting married and when they were going to get married. And then you had the actual, and so in the parish record, you would see the different banns when they were read out. And then you would also see the actual marriage on that, in that book as well somewhere. That was after the banns had been read. So when you're doing the marriage one, you have to look on the register. Is it the banns that I'm looking at, or is it the actual marriage I am looking at? And in some cases, there was also when the marriage license was issued, and you have to look at the marriage license because down below that is where the actual marriage was recorded. Or the actual marriage could be recorded on a different page. So there is no consistency in format for any of this information. It's all based on the parishes, what was required by law, etc., etc., etc. And it's of course changed over time as information has changed. But on the marriage bans, certificates, licenses, registrations, all of that sort of stuff, you will find the name of the bride, the name of the groom. You may see their age. Now, on some of them, it had of age, which meant they were at least the minimum age where they did not require parental approval to get married. And here's the interesting thing. In, what years was it? In England, back in the 1800s, the men had to could legally get married without parental approval at the age of 25. Anything up to the age of 25, they needed parental approval. Women, however, could get married at the age of 18 without, and anything below 18, were required to have parental approval. That came up on one of the marriage certificates marriage registrations I came across, where the groom was 24, and it had there that the permission was provided by, and I'm like, what the heck is this? So of course I had to go research it to find out that in that place and time, if men were under the age of 25, they required parental approval. I'm like, so men couldn't get married without parental approval until they were 25, yet women could get married without parental approval at the age of 18. Interesting. So you find out all sorts of cool stuff. So on the marriage certificate, you'll definitely have the bride's name, the groom's name. You will either have their age written there, you might even have the year of birth written in there, or it could just say of age, which meant they were over whatever the legal age requirement was for them not to have parental approval. In some marriage records and things, you will have the names of the fathers only and what their occupation is. Oh, so sorry. On the bride and groom, you will have whether or not they are a bachelor or a spinster. Yes, going back to old language. So whether they're married or unmarried, are they widowed? Had they previously been married and now divorced? And yes, divorces took place in the 1800s. How many? And on some, I have even said how many. It's even said how many times have you been married? For those with multiple, who have been married multiple times. So it was like, what is your current marital status? And either have, usually it's bachelor or and spinster for the woman, bachelor for the men. And then it would have their occupations listed, where they resided, and then it would have, most of them have the names of the father of the bride, father of the groom, and what their occupations were. And some will even go further and put what country or where were the bride and groom. No, sorry, the parents, where the fathers were born. On some, later on in time, I tell you, records change over time. There's a lot of stuff going on. But if you're doing this research wiki, it will tell you what information you can expect to get off the records at certain times. And in some, they will even have the mother's names on there too, with their maiden names, the names they were known by before they were married. So that may even be on some marriage registrations, certificates, banns, that sort of thing. Then there will also be the names of the witnesses who witnessed the marriage. Again, extra information that you can get to go and look up, who are these people? Are they related to the bride and groom in any way? It could be the groom's brother was the best man. The bride's sister was like the maid of honor, was one of the signatories on there as well. So you can find out a lot of really cool information on there too. And of course the date of the wedding. The most important detail, the date of the wedding and where they got married. And so if you've got the certificate there and you want to see the original parish records, then you now have where you can go back and see the original parish records. That information to help you. So every piece of thing that you get gives you a little clue into who these people are and where they came from, and possibly names of parents. So it helps you build your tree that way. Then we come to the death certificates. Death certificates, these have to be my favorite records, and here's why. The death certificates, you have to remember, is now marriage certificates, birth certificates are registered at the time that it happened, and the information provided is usually as typically first person, except for even on the birth certificate, it is usually a parent that is registering that. When it comes to death certificates, these are a different ballgame. Now, you can have a spouse who gives this information. It could be a member of the family that gives the information. It could be a family friend who provides the information about the person who died. On a death certificate, you normally have their name, first name, last name, and if they were a woman who was married, what their maiden name was. Maiden names are important because it helps us find the records for the women. And then it will list the deceased's parents and where they were born. It may list, on some death certificates, I have seen the children and their ages written. On other ones, it's just had the ages of the children that are still alive. So these are the ones that are still alive. If it is a woman, it may even have, I have seen this twice now on a death certificate, where it had how many children the woman had and how many were alive when she passed. So that's even recorded on the death certificate. Also on the death certificate, it will have who provided the information and how they are related to the person who died. So it could be a wife, it could be a husband, it could be a child that's registering the birth, it could be a sibling, an uncle, a grandparent, and we've even had family friend written in there, or friend of the family. But the bit I like about the death certificates, and this is why I think it's important to have this, is that it has to be signed off by a doctor, and it has on there the date they died, the time that they died, and the cause of death. Now, the cause of death provides us with some great information. And you're probably going, what the hell are you talking about? So, cause of death. If you are researching the family and you're going back and you're gathering these death certificates and you got the cause of death, is there a trend through the family tree of heart disease, of diabetes, of cancer that people have passed from? Because it will put what the main cause of death was, and then it will put if there's any underlying causes, Alzheimer's, dementia, whatever it is. And yes, the terms will be slightly different based on the time period that these were reported. Because, there were some diseases that weren't as specified as dementia or Alzheimer's at certain times in history. There was, cancer was one of those other things as well. That yes, they may have had, cancer came around, and then it was, as the time developed and technology developed, the different forms of cancer started coming out. So when you put together the family tree with the causes of death, is there a trend coming down your direct line? Is there a trend that is in the sidelines as well? And the sidelines being the siblings of the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents, etc. So is there a trend within the family tree of a certain disease? Is it heart? And heart is a very common one that you see a lot of the time. So it's looking for the commonalities in the causes of death, because that could be a genetic a thing that's passed down through the genes. So that is something that you may want to get tested for. Just saying. And this too is where DNA testing can come in very helpful for this too, because a lot of the DNA tests out there are now looking at the health markers on your DNA. So not only they're looking at the ethnicity as well, they're also looking at health markers, and they say there is potential. They're not saying it's absolute. They're saying we see these markers. This is typically what it means, and it affects about this percentage of people who have this marker. And there's very broad. That's very broad, but it gives you an idea. And then when you go back and so that's the blood work side of things. But when you're going back and looking at the death certificates, did we have that heart disease coming down through that? You may get a marker on your thing that says that you may have a potential to develop heart disease. So you start living a healthy life. But then when you're going back through the death certificates, is that supported anywhere in my tree? Is it coming down through my direct line? Is there heart disease coming down through the direct line? So this is where death certificates can be very, very helpful on helping to give you a heads up that this may develop. So, there's a lot of great information out there. It's knowing how to read it, how to interpret it, where to find it. And if you go to familysearch.org and click on their resources and go down to where it says Research Wiki, you then pick whichever country you want to do the research in, what area of that country you want to do the whether it's state, county, town, whatever the regional thingy is, and it tells you what records are available, what ones are available online. If there's any restrictions, it gives you a history into that particular area, especially when it comes to keeping records and things. They'll even turn around and say that they didn't start keeping records until this time period when the law was passed. They had to start doing the records, so it took the next number of years to start getting that into place. Prior to that, it may be in church records or parish records and things like that. So the wiki is really, really good at telling you where to go to get information. And when I discovered that tool, I was like, had a whole new world, a whole new world. So sorry, serious stuff, the funny stuff. And when I get too serious, the funny stuff starts coming out. So vital records, births, deaths, marriages, and I even throw in their baptisms and christenings because sometimes they weren't recording the births. The only way you knew about the births was through the baptism and the christening records that were kept at the parishes. And if you happen to have a family Bible where somebody wrote in at the time that this person was born on then that's a great resource too. It gives you a place to start. But anyway, so that's our little lesson today for the family history on vital records. So what vital records do you have? And yes, you can order copies of certificates based on what the requirements are for that, but usually historical records. I have got several birth, death, and marriage certificates from England for my ancestors that came from England. Do I have any Scottish ones and Irish? I don't have the Scottish and Irish ones yet. Yeah, I'm still going to work on those. And I have some here from the States. My mother-in-law did a lot of work in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s of family tree research. And this was well before computers came along. So there was a lot of letter writing and waiting weeks, months to get replies. But she's got birth, death, and marriage certificates for some of my husband's paternal side of the family that came from Lithuania, Ukraine, Russia. Then she's got records on her side of the family that were from Germany, that she got sent over to her, and they've all been translated. So because they were in whatever language was being used at the time, and she's got them all translated. So it's going to make it very easy for me to go in and enter this information. I'm just going to get a really good scanner to scan them all in, and then I can go attach them to the tree and stuff like that. So yeah, if you can get your hands on certificates and things, and then there's a certified copy, and then there's just a copy, and the certified copy will have the raised seal on it, the embossed seal. You can see notaries taking the thing and clamping it, and it makes that little raised thingy. I think these days now it's just more of a stamp. But they do have the seal thing that they can do. So if you're getting a certified copy, it usually comes with the embossed seal on it to show, and it turns around and says that it's a copy, and it gives all the details on there that it's a copy of and where they got it from and all of that. So that's it about Vital Records Day. If you have any questions about Vital Records, then please drop them in the comments below. We'll be happy to answer them for you. And if you have some interesting stories about birth, deaths, and marriage certificates, and even baptismal records, christening records, then just drop them in the comments below too if you want to share them. Until tomorrow, let's see, tomorrow is Thursday. Let's see, what have I got? Okay, so tomorrow is Thursday, so we're going for a 7 o'clock one tomorrow because I have a mastermind group meeting tomorrow. So 7 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow. Remember to mark your calendars for October the 7th at 5 p.m. because we're going to have a very special guest coming on. But otherwise, we will see you tomorrow at, what did I say, 7 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow, and we'll find another topic to talk to you about for Family History Month. So have a super fantastic, sparkling evening. Hey, konera.